Hey guys, it's Eureka, your host of the Happy Child series. Today I want to introduce to you Alma. She's the founder of a company called BrainWorks, and their company works with families to overcome learning and behavioral challenges. And what's really unique about her program is that it looks at the behaviors from a neurological perspective and really honing into the root cause of the problems. Both of her sons were diagnosed with multiple devastating conditions, including autism, ADD, ADHD, sensory processing disorders, and several other conditions. So Alma set on a journey to look for solutions that didn't require prescription medication. And over the last 20 years, she has touched thousands of people's lives and really empowered parents to have a more joyful family life. And so without further ado, I want to welcome Alma, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, thank you, Eureka. Thank you so much for having me and for allowing me to share some of the most amazing tools that help my kids. Because like what you were just saying, I have two boys and they both had such devastating diagnoses. This was back in the 90s when there was no internet, there was no Google. And so it was challenging. It was really challenging. And my doctors, my pediatricians, my people that were the experts were not really giving me solutions as to what and pathways. What can I do with my kids? And so after I really got out of my pity party, because it really became so dark in that age, in that time in my life, because there was two doctors that for my older son, they suggested that I would consider putting him in a group home and moving on, because by then I had a baby. And later on I found out that the baby also had tons of challenges. And so now when I was within, looking at two boys with so many challenges, once I kind of like pulled myself from my bootstraps, I'm like, okay, they came to me for a reason, so I'm going to find what I need to do with them. And so I started searching, and I did everything under the sun that would come to me and that I could afford. Right? And there's so many things that are beautiful out there, but for my kids and for my family, I would do a therapy and it would give me a tiny bit of change. And so that was frustrating, because if as a parent, and sounds like some of your parents are also looking for answers, you put so much into something and you don't really get a ton back. And the more I kept searching, all of a sudden I came to this one this modality, and it was called neurological reorganization. It was actually really more like the concept of neurological reorganization, which was really interesting. So there wasn't a lot of people that were doing this in the 90s. There still isn't. That's one of the reasons why I'm excited to share this with your viewers, because it made so much sense when I finally heard about it. And what it was is that neurological reorganization is really going back to the early centers, to the early building blocks of us as a human, and then duplicating certain movements, integrating reflexes. And as we do that, we acquire functions. And with these functions, now we're able to go out into the world or be in our life, and things can flow. Things are effortless. Learning is joyful. Mm-hmm. But what I found is that when we don't have these early building blocks and these reflexes integrated, then now you're left with a brain that has to figure out how to compensate. And when the brain is not able to compensate, then behaviors start to show up. For example, if the baby didn't have enough tummy time, then the brain is gonna be alerted to danger in a constant way, which many times from the brain's perspective, it may not really be in danger, but it goes into that fight or flight and tons of anxiety. So for me, that is really sad, because that's robbing our kids of the ability to be kids. Because they can't, no matter how much you talk to them, it's like, it's safe, it's okay. Language is not when we're in the pons, by the way, is in the back. It's in the early part of the brain. It's like the the reptilian part of the brain area. And so what I found is that, you start with reflexes, then there's two parts of the brain that we really look at, and that's the pons and the midbrain. And these two parts of the brain, they need to be developed before we get upright. But if they don't, then again, we're gonna end up having tons of challenges. And so what I learned is that how much development we got at the very beginning is really equivalent to how many functions I have available to me.
Well, Alma, you have two sons that had a whole bunch of behavior challenges due to like ADD, ADHD, and autism. And so can you share a little bit with us about your story?
So thank you. Yes. So, oh my gosh, they had so many challenges, Eureka. They actually didn't even speak until after they were 6 years old. So that kind of gives you a pretty broad perspective of what kinds of challenges came with that. So tons of meltdowns. I mean, really long meltdowns because of just that inability to communicate. So they were really like 2-hour meltdowns.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I was pretty much homebound for quite a bit of time when they were young. And then when I found the neurological reorganization aspect of it, that's when, like I said, everything just shifted so much in my life that actually I felt calmer. And that was because I was doing the movements right along with them. And lo and behold, that was probably the most amazing thing that happened in my life, because I didn't know that my brain didn't have all the neural connections until I didn't need to compensate anymore. And I was like, what? That blew me away, because, I thought I was okay. Actually, I learned that one of my greatest compensations was that I was a really hard worker. Like, I had incredibly work ethic, and I'm like, yeah, I can outwork anyone. But yes, that's a great thing. I thought that was a really great thing. And it is a great thing. The thing is that I had to work harder than most people to accomplish what I had. Until then, when I did the movements myself, then all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, it was almost like my bandwidth got expanded and I can take on so much more, but with less stress than ever before. And that started blowing me away. And so what happened is people started seeing that changes were happening in my kids, and they're like, what's going on with them? And they're like, well, can you work more with my kid? And I'm like, that's wild. I'm like, well, okay, I'll just duplicate what I'm doing with my kids. And lo and behold, it's like, they started seeing changes as well. And why this is so incredibly important for me to share my message is because this research was done in the 50s with brain injured kids. And so, for whatever reason, well, I think that a lot of it, it's not a magic pill, right? We have to work on it on a daily basis. That's how the brain basically rewires itself with movement. And so it's movements that we need to do on a daily basis. But oh my gosh, when we do that, as a parent, we're taking care of ourselves so that then we can really take care of our children. And that was probably the most amazing, beautiful gift that I got as a parent.
Yeah, that totally reminds me of like that quote, we know what we know and we don't know what we don't know. And like what we know is like this compared to what we don't know is this. And so like it sounds like what you discovered was as you were doing this with your child, you also got to reorganize parts of your brain that you lacked as an infant or as a toddler. Yes. To develop those again. And how amazing to do it alongside with your kids. So you guys are both, rewiring those parts of the brain.
Yes, and that's why our program actually is a family program. If there's a family involved, it's a family program. But interestingly enough, now a huge amount of our clients are adults that just have figured out that, oh my gosh, they've been working way too hard. And so, as we age, our compensations also age. And then they're not as effective and efficient as when we were younger. And so we get tired as an adult. So when we go back at any age, that's what's so cool about it. At any age, we can go back and finish developing these parts of the brain and acquire these functions, and lo and behold, a huge amount of stress then is released from the brain, so we can come to the cortex and show the world who we really are. Because I got to tell you, one of the biggest things with me is that I was super, super shy. And I thought, I'm like, oh yeah, it's shyness, right? Well, was it shyness or was it flight? Come to find out it was more flight, that when something was a little uncomfortable, I would just tend to not engage. And so when we go back and do this work for ourselves, we really get to know more about who we are. We get to really experience life in a totally different level, so that then we can do what we really want to do with our children, which is to help them and help them be able to have joyful lives and more, the ability to thrive, not just, hold on for dear life, which is what I was doing for the longest time.
Yeah, I always have this saying with my clients, is I ask them, like, are you thriving or are you just surviving, right? And really, ultimately, we as humans, we want to thrive in our lives. I love that you shared that thing about you being shy, because I actually feel like I'm quite shy myself too. What so you're saying that there's like a movement or a strategy or something, or a physical movement that we can do to help with this part of our brain that helps with the flight?
Yes. So part of the Pons' work, and the job of the Pons, is to look at our environment and then perceive it. If it's threatening, it's going to kick us into action to make us, be able to survive. That's the main job. But when we didn't get enough development, the brain can really understand what's really threatening and what is perceived as a threat. And so if it's real, we want to make sure that we're taken care of and we survive. But if we didn't get enough development, it can be anything, and it's going to perceive it as that's a threat, and that's going to make us either withdraw or fight. And so there's a huge amount of empathy that I want to share with, or sharing this information is going to give a lot of empathy to our parents, because it sure did for me. Because I thought that my kids, yeah, they had all these challenges, but I really thought they were like just stubborn at times, that were just, just defiant, and it had nothing to do with that. It was really that the early centers were not allowing the brain to be able to easily take on their environment and respond according. It was a lot of reacting. It was a lot of melting down, because everything just felt overwhelming to the system. So yes, we can go back and doing these movements. All of a sudden, I don't feel shy anymore. I just show up as, me.
That's amazing.
That was nice.
In our earlier conversation, you shared that a lot of times with kids, they get labeled as their behavior, right? So like if you have a child who has meltdowns all the time or acts out all the time, so they have a behavior issue, and we label that to the child. But you said it's not like the importance of not labeling the behavior of the child, or like that child is. We start to identify that child with, right? And how it's important to not do that. Can you speak a little bit into that?
That's a great conversation to have, because so how I look at it is, I look at how the brain is organized and see what kinds of development now ability that child has, or what kind of functions they have available. So when a child is reacting exactly what you just said, they're going to be labeled. I don't necessarily like any labels, but I know that we need to have an umbrella to kind of have a conversation about certain things. What I like to look at is like, where is the root of this behavior really coming from? So if I have a child that's constantly in fight or flight, like shyness or always combative, I'm looking at the pons. I'm looking at that part of the brain. When I have a child that can't sit still, that can't pay attention, people look at that child and they're like, oh my gosh, he's so hyperactive. Or he might have not crawled enough, which means that his vestibular system, his balance system, is not strong enough in order to be able to help that child sit still and pay attention. So when that vestibular system, which is the The vestibular system is the balance system, and it's in our inner ear. And when that's sluggish, the child's brain literally, it's almost like it falls asleep. But movement turns it on. So if I get up constantly and I move around, that's going to keep my brain on. But it's going to bother mostly my parent, because for me, I'm speaking what happened with me. When my children were doing some behaviors, that would bother me because I didn't have the compensations. I mean, I didn't. It was like, would you please not move? Because then that's rattling me. And so I like to be able to then make sure that parents understand that a lot of the behaviors that our children are doing are really due to something completely different, and they're not being defiant. They're not being OCD. OCD also might have a little bit of that midbrain aspect of it, because now I can't shift gears. Like I need something to be done a certain way, and it needs to happen that way because it's consistency. And the brain, when it's disorganized, it needs structure, it needs consistency. But what if we go back and we finish these early centers so that then the brain can flow, that we can flow. When something happens, we can just move on to the next thing, instead of like, well, but you said we're going to do this, and why aren't we doing this? And you promised we're going to do this, and no matter what you say, the child is not able to go on to the next thing because they had something in their mind and they can't shift gears. Shifting gears comes with crawling.
You know, this is totally lighting all these like light bulbs in my brain, because, you know, like I work with blind kids, and what I see from kids who are congenitally blind, they have a repetitive movement. So there's like a lot of like rocking and things like that. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that might be due to they weren't allowed to crawl as blind infants. Like that is part of the normal development, and so they need that physical stimulation in order to feel like calm.
Yes, absolutely. And you know what's crazy too? Part of the midbrain is also to give me the awareness of where I am in space. So if I didn't get enough chance, or if I didn't have the chance to crawl, I don't know where I am in space. So the vestibular system needs to be activated through the movement that you've just been saying, but they also need to touch everything. That's logical when you have a child that can't see. But what's interesting is that you have children that are able to see, and they go and touch everything. And parents and you know, professionals, they're like, well, why do you have to touch everything? Well, but you know, you working with children that can't see, you totally understand that. That's logical for someone that can't see, but it's also logical when the other child, even though they can see, they don't know where they're at in space. And so that's where there's a misconception, and we don't understand why. Why do they have to touch everything? Well, because if I don't know where I am in space, there I am. There I am. I'm touching everything. That's giving me feedback where I am. If I'm sitting down and I'm kicking the table, oh, there I am. You know, or I'm you know, I might be sitting down and I'm playing with something, my hair if I'm a girl, you know, or just putting, you know, my shirt in my mouth, and all of that is information for my proprioceptive system, the system that lets me know where I am in space. And so it's so incredibly, insanely beautiful to understand that those early centers really need to be developed in order for us to be able to thrive.
Yeah, that is so interesting, and like, wow, like mind blowing. Like, you know, to me too. It's just like, oh, this is making sense now. So in your program and in BrainWorks, so you go through specific strategies and motions that can work on these areas.
Yeah, so we have a program where we work with families. It's actually a year-long support program, but we ask that they commit to doing the movements for 6 months. But we'll support them. You know, some families need a little bit more than just the 6 months. So it just depends on what the brain needs. And so within a year, most people are pretty much almost done with the process. So we go back to the very beginning. We have to do movements on a daily basis. Usually it's about 20 minutes a day that we ask, but they don't all have to be together. All the movements don't have to be together. We can weave them in. And And as we do that, then the brain starts to reorganize and calmness starts to happen in the body first and foremost. And that's what we need. We need to be able to get out of that fight or flight, the consistent fight or flight, so that then the adrenals, that's another aspect of it too. You know, when we're always in stress, we're very likely to get sick because we're just so fatigued in our system. And you know what's so cool is our oldest participant is actually going through our program right now, and she's 78. So at any age, and you could look at her and I'm like, she's a very accomplished person. She's a PhD psychologist. And so, you know, she's very successful, but she's like, yeah, but I know that there's more and I want to be able to keep growing. And I'm like, wow, that's very inspirational to me.
Yeah, that is. So can you share with us like one movement or strategy that a parent can use with their child? Like, for example, like if they're having a meltdown, because I know a lot of kids, especially with distance learning right now, are having meltdowns, right? And talk about like sitting in front of a computer for 6 hours a day and not getting that, not even just like body movement, but, you know, like all the things that you were talking about, the vestibular proprioception and things like that, especially for kids that I'm thinking like who have ADHD. What is a strategy that parents or educators can use?
Perfect. I'm super happy to share this. Okay, I'm going to share with you guys my absolute favorite to get out of fight or flight. And it's almost not even a movement, to be honest, and that's what's so cool about it. What it is something that's called hookups. It's a calming posture. So I'm going to have you do it with me. Why don't you cross your ankles? So cross your legs at the bottom, cross your ankles, one over the other. And then you're going to put your hands in front of you, thumbs down, clasp your hands like this, and bring them up to your chest. Just like that. And then your tongue is going to go to the roof of your mouth, or for a child, just having them close their mouth. Typically, the tongue automatically just goes to the roof of the mouth. So it's really important that we don't talk. So in this position, what's happening is this position is drawing lots of blood to the heart. We're in one circuit. It's a one continuous circuit in our body, drawing blood to the heart. Now, if that's challenging for some of the kiddos, this is fine. This is even easier, right? But it's the same thing. So once the heart gets calm, the brain gets calm. So when the brain gets calm, then we can actually go from that fight or flight back to the cortex. So by far, it's my favorite movement to do, because one, you can't talk. And when the child is melting down, if you engage, you enrage, flat out. So the least talking engagement that you have with your child when they're in a fight or flight situation, the better it is. The faster they're going to come out of that fight or flight. So if the child is not able to go to this for whatever reason, then you as the parent do this. This is going to calm you down. Then you're going to be able to help your child. Now, you don't want to show them this activity, you know, when they are having a meltdown. You want to talk to them about this, like, oh, guess what? I learned something really powerful to help our brain. So we don't go into this, you know, crazy space where then we're so frustrated and then we don't know what to do. So we're going to practice it when they're in their cortex, when they're in their calm brain. And so you're going to show them how to do it. And then you're going to model it. So whenever there's a moment that you feel a little frazzled or just not together, not present, you go, hang on, I need to hook up my brain. And so then you go and do that, just like seriously, like do it for 30 seconds just to start modeling, but you do it for a minute, maximum 2 minutes, and you will feel like such a big difference, big difference. And so at the very least, but you got to model it. You have to model it ahead of time. You can't just in the spur of the moment, it's like, you know what, why don't you get into hookups? Oh, it's not going to work. But
yeah. I mean, like, even when I was just doing that, I think I just did it for like 30 seconds, I felt a lot more calm.
Yeah. And it really is, because it's like as soon as the heart gets calm, the brain then just all of a sudden gets calm.
Yeah.
This is
That's
one too, if you have challenges falling asleep,
mm,
you
mhm,
can, you know, you're laying down and you're just cross your ankles and put your hands like this, and
mhm.
you know that calms the system down, which then calms the brain down, which a lot of the times it just knocks us out. So, but you know
Amazing.
what's better is we're going to share with you guys. We did a 3-hour workshop where I go way more in depth into the pons, the midbrain reflexes, and all of that. So it's 3-hour long workshop, and we're going to gift that to your family so they can see it whenever they want. And one of the other things is that as I started talking to other parents, there's a lot of stress with back to school and all of that, and so
Mhm.
I have been in the schools and know the stress that happens. And so I was talking to my co-founder, Bob, and I'm like, hey, let's create a week-long workshop where we meet once a day. And so we called it the Back to School Toolbox, where we show all kinds of strategies as to, from the brain's perspective, what kinds of things, what kind of activities can you do with your child to make sure that they're learning, and that it's fun, and so that
Mhm.
then the child doesn't feel like, oh my gosh, I can't get this. And so when you understand how to weave certain movements in, then that's going to help a whole bunch of, you know, things start to calm down with the relationship of you and your child.
Mhm.
It's,
Yeah. So thank you so much for your generous offer. Alma is offering that 3-hour workshop. It is free for this audience, and you will find the link in this email or this video below. And the Back to School Toolbox, that one is $47, correct? Yeah,
yes,
and it's 1 week long, which
yes.
is a steal. So if you parents are having a difficult time with your students, like with your kids, distance learning, really struggling, $47, try it out for a week, right? That, and see if there's progress.
Yes, I
Thank you so
just had a
much.
conversation today with a teacher that has been in education for 37 years or 34, something like that, but it's in the 30s. And she said, I've never seen something that had so many strategies, and especially for that price. And so she was
Mhm.
like, I told my administrator, we should do an in-service for this.
Mm.
So, you know, from a
I-
parent's perspective, and understanding and knowing how extremely hard it was not to have answers.
mhm.
My goal is to really share what worked for my life, what worked for my kids' life. And it's like what you said, it's unprecedented times that we're living in. So we kind of have to, it takes a village. This is our little 2 cents to help our village.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you so much for your time today, Alma, and all of the strategies. And I'm gonna go look at that 3-hour workshop, because I think we can do these things on Zoom, right? Like we can, talk to, as educators, we can do like a Zoom meeting and just talk about it for like 2 minutes. And anytime a student is feeling anxious or, hyper or something, to go back to those strategies, I think is so powerful. And I love that how you really looked into the root cause of it with the brain, like which part of the brain didn't develop, where are we missing, and then going back to, like, it's scientific and it totally makes sense. And thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge, wisdom, your story. Your story is so powerful. Um, and thanks for being here with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for sharing my message. Appreciate it.
Okay, yay.